Okay, so that works. I would stop it because there's not a whole lot of storage on that.
Pause record. Hope that's okay with everybody.
You might as well start with introductions, Jim.
Okay. Okay, welcome everyone to our monthly peer learning network meeting for the Forest Business Alliance. For those who might not know, the Forest Business Alliance, we support CAL FIRE's wood products and bioenergy team and their wood products and bioenergy business and workforce development grant program. That's a big mouthful. They currently have an open solicitation where proposals are due April 25th. So if anyone's interested in applying to the grant fund at CAL FIRE, then you have time to prepare your proposal. I work with the Forest Business Alliance for the last couple of years and mostly with the Peer Learning Network, trying to help keep it going. And I think I want to mention we have a monthly meeting, and the next month, May, we are not going to have our monthly meeting. Instead we're having a sawmill workshop in Sacramento, and then back in June we'll have a normal meeting, and we're still working on the speaker for that. Vance, would you like to say a little bit about the sawmill workshop? This is our second sawmill workshop.
Yeah, I'll pop the link in the chat. You guys have probably seen the announcements about it multiple times. But if you haven't registered for it and you want to, please follow the link that I'll put in the chat right now. But it'll be in Sacramento. It's a really great lineup. We've got finance and funders. We have folks talking about marketing, and another panel talking about secondary wood treatment. So it should be a really great workshop with some really great panelists and speakers. So hope you can join that. And by the way, I'm Vance Russell. I'm with I work for my own consulting company that does work on forest health and forest conservation, mostly across the Western US, but also in other parts of the world. I'm one of the members of the Forest Business Alliance. So welcome everybody, and good to see you all here today.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. So I want to just introduce our speaker briefly and then let her do a little more detailed presentation. Rosa Cucicea.
Hey Jim, could before you do that, could we just go around the room and have folks introduce themselves? Especially want to make sure Liam says a couple words about Conservation Acts too, but I definitely want to hear from everybody just kind of who you are and what your business is or organization is.
Yes, by all means. Yeah, I was gonna just do a short introduction to Rosa, and then yeah, let's go ahead with anyone. Yeah, everyone who's here would like to hear just your name and your organization, and what kind of interest you have with the CAL FIRE Fund or other topics, and then we'll move on to Rosa.
I'll
Jess,
start.
why don't you start out since you're at the top of the screen?
Oh, hi. My name is Jess Roney. I'm self-employed. I own a mobile sawmill service. I have a couple of wood drying kilns. I'm also a certified arborist and closely associated with repurposing, recycling urban logs, as well as having relationships with loggers in Sonoma County. So that's about the extent of it, and that's what I do.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hi,
Bill,
I'm
do you
Jeff.
want to... Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I'm Jeff Grafe, Plymouth Wood Fiber, which is an effort to process forest biomass into a product for the horticultural industry to replace peat moss.
And
Excellent.
maybe once you introduce yourself, just pass it on to somebody who has not introduced themselves yet.
Hi, my name's Bill Bach. I'm with Collectron Energy. We're working on a biomass facility up in Quincy, working on WPIA grants, CAL FIRE grant. We're part of a transportation electrification company. And I think we've done some business with River City Bank and Rosa.
Excellent.
I
Thank
guess
you, Bill.
Liam, you're next.
Thanks, Bill. My name's Liam. As I said earlier, I'm the manager of the Fire Grant Challenge that Conservation X Labs runs with its partners. And it's a open innovation competition to try to create new solutions to destructive fire that bring together different types of knowledge. So indigenous, rural, place-based knowledge with new technologies. And we have one of our finalists here, Jeff Grief with Plumas Wood Fiber, who's doing great work. And we are running a 9-month program where our 12 finalist cohort is going to be field testing with grants that we've given them and going through an acceleration period. So very happy to be here in this network to learn from you all and see what kind of cross collaborations can happen.
Excellent. Thank you, Liam.
And I'll pass to Trayton.
Hey everybody, my name is Trayton Northup, owner operator of Acres Forestry. We're a forest health fuels reduction contractor that mainly works in Mono County, surrounding Mammoth Lakes, and yeah, we just do a lot of forest health thinning projects, meadow restoration and stuff like that. So yeah, happy to be here. I'll hand it off to John Azevedo.
Hey, Trayton. My name is John Azevedo. I'm here with Forager Fuels. We're a bioenergy company focused on unmerchantable forestry biomass. And this is my first meeting. We are applying to the CAL FIRE grant next week, and appreciated all the support from the FBA. Who do we have left? Clark?
Hey folks, my name is Clark Stevenson. Apologies for arriving so late. I work with the Watershed Research and Training Center as Forest Stewardship Specialist. Really excited, energized to be a part of this cohort, this group. I look forward to listening in on the monthly calls. I'm currently in charge of exploring and doing the due diligence for a new project and program that will span in multiple regions across the North State. We were recently funded through the California Jobs First Catalyst Fund to explore marketing and sales service that would be able to serve a number of different small scale sawmills with selling their products and developing a pipeline to potential buyers in urban centers. So we're at the beginning stages of this, and I'm really excited to be connecting with a number of different players throughout the supply chain. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Clark.
One thing to add, thanks everybody, and really great group here today. Jim mentioned that we provide technical assistance to the CAL FIRE program. We actually provide technical assistance to any forest health or similar programs. So that includes Forest Service if they have their grant program again, and other agencies that have similar types of forest restoration conservation programs. So I know the CAL FIRE solicitations coming out next week, but there's also CAL FIRE has their forest health program. They also have their tribal wildfire resilience grant program. So there's a lot of grant programs out there. And we're trying to help folks, not just with the proposals, but also with business and program development too. So sorry, Rosa, like we'll let you get to it now, and I'll let Jim introduce you. So really great to have you here.
All right. Yeah, let me just make a super brief introduction of Rosa and then have her introduce herself in more detail. Rosa, yes, thank you so much for being here. Rosa's with the River City Bank in Sacramento. She's the Senior Vice President and the Director of their Clean Energy Division, which started in 2018. And then she's just starting up and also the Director of the Public Sector Banking Division. We reached Rosa through one of our peer learning network participants, Mike Beaker of Collectron Energy, who works with Bill. And that's kind of what we're hoping for with the peer learning network, is for people to make connections with each other and through us and kind of help build a kind of a network. So let's see, I think, so we're really appreciative of Mike for bringing Rosa to us. And I want to see, Rosa, can we, I think it's time to, you want to share your screen? She has a PowerPoint presentation that, let's see.
All right, that work?
Looks good.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction, Jim and Vance. Thank you for having me, the Peer Learning Network. I'll plan to keep the presentation part fairly brief, and I want to make sure we have some time at the end for Q&A. And I realize actually it was very helpful for me to hear the introductions for each of you that are on the call, because I realize not all of you are in the project development space, which is typically my audience when we're talking about financing, specifically as it relates to biomass and wood waste. And so I'll try to temper the conversation to at least address most of that. Some of you might be kind of thinking of this in terms of not just the project ownership, but potentially the feedstock supply for projects. And so I'll try to keep that in mind in terms of the audience, but hopefully this will be helpful. And as Jim mentioned, I'm Rosa Cucicea. I'm the Director of Clean Energy and Public Sector Banking at River City Bank. We are headquartered in Sacramento. I will adjust my slide there. Headquartered in Sacramento, California. I've been in business in Sacramento for over 50 years, 52 years to be exact. Really have our roots in the community banking, I guess, genre of banking. And over the past, I'd say, 10 to 15 years have really shifted to be more of a regional business bank, but still kind of staying true to our community core. And so we've got offices here in Sacramento, where I am based, also in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then we've got some staff in Southern California. So really, it's the entire state of California that we service, with sort of a nexus in the Sacramento and the Bay Area. Up until recently, I was in the Bay Area. I've opened up our San Francisco office there and have just moved back to Sacramento. So it's nice to see all the development that's happened here over the last decade. So it's in some cases, if you guys are familiar with the Sacramento region, it feels a little new, but it's good to be back. And just for reference, in terms, banks are typically noted in terms of the size of their assets. We are a little bit over 5 billion in assets, and so that puts us at the higher end of the range for community banks and kind of the lower end of the range for regional banks. So I guess the perfect way to describe us is a big little bank. Which for entrepreneurs and businesses in the region is kind of the perfect size, where you're big enough, we're big enough to where we can manage most commercial needs, but small and nimble enough to where we can make decisions locally and more in a boutique fashion. So that's really kind of what separates us from some of the other lenders you might see in the clean energy or the project finance space. Mentioned this already, we formally launched our clean energy division in 2018, but we've been active in that space really since 2010. Our claim to fame in the clean energy sector is that we were the first bank and the only bank for a long period of time to provide financing and banking services to community choice aggregators, or CCAs, in California. I think some of you on the call may be familiar with what CCAs are, as they are I think still today, the largest procurers of energy under PPA contracts in the state of California now, sort of surpassing our investor-owned utilities. That opportunity really opened up the pathway for us to be able to provide project financing to clean energy projects. And so the first deals that we did were actually brought to us by our CCA clients, where they were the off-takers buying the power, and then there was a third-party developer that owned the asset. And so that's kind of how we cut our teeth on project finance. And since then, we've financed things from solar, battery storage, bioenergy, which is probably kind of the segment that most of you are interested in. We're interested in kind of learning, more and about, other opportunities in the sector. The other thing I'll mention, we always talk about lending when it comes to clean energy and in general, because that's kind of the primary need that folks have is access to capital. But I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to share that we also do bank a lot of deposit-only clients, and we do have very competitive interest rates and fee structures. And I welcome each of you, if you're looking for a new bank, to consider River City. Banks need deposits in order to continue doing loans. That's kind of our funding source. And so that's always kind of the pitch that I at least like to leave with folks, as we get into kind of some more of the complicated credit structures. Okay. All right. This is a very simple slide, and Jim, you have my permission. You're welcome to share the slide deck with the participants or anybody else in the network. But it really does hit on the primary considerations for project financing. And so this is, just to take a step back in terms of project financing, this would be for, let's say in your case would be a bioenergy project where there's an owner developer and then a third party PPA contract for electricity offtake. But these concepts of project finance can really be translated to any type of project, whether it's biomass, whether it's energy storage, solar. And so just kind of keep that in mind as we go through each of these. The biggest question I always get from folks that are either on the development side or kind of interested in project ownership, or even interested in, being the PPA offtaker, like let's say a city or a county that's looking to do a project in their region, and they want to, kind of kick the tires around on, what does a bank really need in order to make a financing like that happen? And so I think the number one kind of obvious thing would be commercially proven technology. Banks, that provide debt to projects are risk averse. We do not share in the upside of equity returns. The only thing that a bank gets out of doing financings is the interest rates that they charge. And so we have to be very, a lot more structured than somebody that's providing, for example, private equity capital. And so it's a good distinction to kind of keep in mind as you approach lenders on new projects. It's, it has to be commercially proven technology in order for a commercial traditional lender to provide capital. I'd say number two item here, project interconnection and permitting, it's number two on the list, but it's really number one in my heart. And I can't tell you how many interesting projects that have come across my desk, and then they just sit there in the queue for months and in some cases years because of interconnection delays and permitting delays. And so that's always the first question that I will ask, is where are we in the interconnection and permitting queue? And so some of these may be very obvious to you all if you've got a background in project development, but I get these questions enough to where I think it's helpful to kind of go through these. The number three, sources and strength of equity providers. I think it's maybe important to take a step back and think about kind of what the capital stack for a project might look like. There's always going to be some level of equity that's required by whether it's, directly from the project owners or, equity that's raised from a third party that is then, provided to the project owners before a lender can come in and provide debt, because, a lender providing debt will not finance 100% of the project or anywhere close to that. Typically, the ratio is going to be, 50 to 60% equity, whether that's in form of, grants that are received, tax equity investors, or kind of traditional private equity investors. Those are kind of the three buckets that are most common. And then the remainder of those project costs are typically financed by debt. The number 4 item, and again, if I had to choose, this is also kind of in that number 1 or 2 spot in terms of, my first questions to a project owner when we're talking about financing is, who's the off-taker? What is their credit worthiness? We don't necessarily need the off-taker to be credit rated by a third-party agency, because we can do our own kind of shadow ratings internally as long as we have access to the financial statements and have an understanding of the business model. And then number 2 is feedstock contracts, especially for biomass. I mean, I don't think I have to underscore this for this audience is, you could have the perfect project, best technology, the best off-taker, everything's running smoothly, but if you don't have the feedstock available, or something happens and disrupts that, you have nothing, because you can't generate electricity from nothing when it comes to biomass projects. And so that's kind of where, I'd say a little bit of a mismatch in the market is the duration of the feedstock contract. And I know that's been a topic that's been kind of taken up by a number of different organizations, where there's a bit of a push to try to get the contracts for the feedstock to align better with the revenue contracts, the PPAs. And so that's kind of an area where, as a lender, I'd love to see a little bit longer duration on the feedstock contracts, understanding that there are, variations in the type of feedstock, whether it's, forest waste or from a sawmill. There's a lot of different variations to take into consideration, but generally, the longer the contract, the more financeable the project is. There are certain things coming kind of to light. I haven't financed a project this way, but I've talked to some peers who are looking at insurance that would cover kind of the feedstock component, whether that's availability or trying to fix the cost range so that, you're not kind of a few years into the project and then the cost of that particular feedstock skyrockets. Excuse me, I have to move to turn the light back on. And so those are kind of, I'd say, some innovative things that are kind of currently happening in the space, and I think will probably be more prevalent as we see more projects come online. Last but not least, and these are kind of related, number 5 and 6 is the development and construction team experience. So whether that's the developer or the EPC contractor that they hire, have they done this before? What's their track record? Have they been successful? And then, specific to bioenergy projects, plant operator experience is very different than financing, for example, solar and wind, where it just kind of sits there and you need some people to order, some maintenance and cleaning, and, somebody to figure out how to read the monitoring system. But with the plant, you really do need staff there 24/7. And so, having that operator experience is really important and kind of a big part of the underwriting process. That was a lot of information. And before I go to the next slide, where I'll talk a little bit about what are some key steps that you could do to better present your loan request package to a bank, are there any questions that that are burning related to project financing? I'll pause and see if there's any.
Hey, Rosa, this is
Oh,
Bill
go ahead,
Bach.
Bill.
Oh, sorry. What are you seeing as timelines on the offtake and feedstock agreements? What's the general, are you seeing 10-year contracts? What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I'd say for electricity, offtakes, typically it's 15 to 20. I've seen 25 years, so that's kind of typical. I think 10 years would be okay as well, but just consider that a lender they'll want a bit of a tail. If the contract is 10 years, you probably only get financing for about 7 to 8 years, because there has to be kind of a tail on that cash flow just to cover any uncertainties. So that's kind of, one thing to kind of consider.
So part of the, biomass, bioengineering facilities, typically that I'm gonna run have also biochar as one of the offtake contracts, right? So, I mean, can those be 10-year contracts, or just depending on the economics of the project, or what's that? I guess.
Yeah, I haven't seen any contracts for biochar. I've seen biochar, as a modeled revenue source, but it's not been contracted, so it's not something that we were able to kind of give credit to in terms of the loan sizing, and we kind of would look at it as gravy, so to speak, in terms of the potential cash flows into the project, but not something that you could really underwrite to unless you have, I'd probably need a little more information on the type of contract, and like who's buying it, and are they willing to fix the price of that commodity for a longer period of time.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And then I think you also had a question on feedstock duration contracts. The longest feedstock contract that I've seen has been, I want to say, 3 to 5 years. And so because there's a mix match in the contract term for the revenues and the term of the loans that most project owners are seeking, relative to the term of the feedstock contract, there's typically, has to be some sort of credit enhancement included in the package, whether that's personal guarantees from the project owners, or using loan programs like USDA guarantees, or in the state of California there's certain various programs under the iBank model that could potentially work. So there has to be some form of credit enhancement to kind of shore up that risk, and so I haven't seen a feedstock contract that is coterminous effectively with the revenue contract on the PPA side.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, and any other questions?
I'm curious too, this is Vance, I'm curious with the feedstock contracts for if they're mostly on private land for the projects you've been doing, or if they are public land, if that's been a challenge to get longer term feedstock contracts.
Yes to both. So private land ones, with agricultural, farmers, etc. They tend to be easier to negotiate. I have seen some longer term contracts on the forest side, but I think there's a bit of a gap and some education happening in that sector, and so I wouldn't be surprised if those contracts would now be longer. But I think there is kind of a general hurdle for some government run agencies to sign longer term contracts for I think a myriad of reasons, but that's kind of the feedback that we've received.
Hi, Rosa. This is Clark. On that point, I'm curious to know if you have any weight towards feedstock ratios, or are you only interested in contract terms?
Can you say more on that?
Sure. Sometimes around a specific site, there's feedstock analysis that shows how much feedstock could be procured, which is feedstock ratio, and then other times it's just, the contract is actually the material that's coming directly to
Yeah,
the facility.
yeah. That's a great question. And so we do require a feedstock study, which does tell us the feedstock ratio. And for example, like if the project is located in the middle of a forest and there's just plenty of potential feedstock in the area, that does kind of change the risk profile a little bit. Whereas if the project is located, further from the feedstock source, and there could be some challenge in, trucking the material to the project site, so those are all kind of things that we consider. But it certainly is more comfortable from a credit perspective to see projects that are closer to feedstock and in range where there's plenty of backup available feedstock in case the primary source goes away for whatever reason. Okay,
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
I was curious about the debt term duration and if there was any range of debt value that you typically see for projects like this, minimums and maximums. And by the way, this is extremely helpful, and your breakdown of the ratio of equity versus debt, all this is very insightful. Thank you, Rosa.
Yeah. I appreciate that feedback. So typically for project finance like this, the loan portion is going to be around, I'd say probably, 40 to 50, 40 to 60, depending on the loan structure, percent of the cost of the project, assuming this is new construction, new build. And the rest is going to be equity. And we also, a lot of these projects do have, grants, for example. And so like if you have a grant and, we can understand the parameters of that grant, or you've received the cash from that grant, that is counted as part of, equity capital. It's cash that's injected into the project. And so that's kind of, typical in terms of the ratio. I think part of your question was on the duration, the term of the loan.
Yeah, not so much the ratio. I guess, are there upper limits to that? If you get 3 million in grants, are you guys, with the right list of requirements laid out here, is a $2 million, debt structure in the cards, or do you guys have a different range in that sense? And then yes, the other part of it, sorry, was you mentioned like longer terms were preferred. I was just hoping you could quantify that, like what's kind of an ideal term length from your perspective.
Yeah, so the grant amount, let's say you have $3 million in grant, we would consider that as equity, as long as like you have the money in your hands. Sometimes there's bridge capital needed for that grant, where you have to show certain milestones, of a project before you get that money. And so, that's something to consider, where you would need outside capital for that. But the same parameters would apply in terms of like that 40 to 60% debt. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great. Does that answer your full question?
Was any range of timeline that you guys prefer?
Oh, on the term of the loan?
Right.
Yeah, it's very much dependent on the revenue contract. And so, typically the duration on a project like this typically doesn't go beyond a 10-year loan term. That's kind of typical.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other questions before we move on? Great. Awesome. Very good questions, everyone. So let me move on here. So here's a little cheat sheet I've put together in terms of kind of like what do developers typically need in order to get a swift credit decision. Because I can tell you from experience, the absolute worst thing you can do is data dump a banker and just say, here are all the files and let me know what you can do on the debt. The more organized you can be with your request and the more organized you can be with your files and the information that you're providing, the better response you'll get. It's kind of like, I don't know, what's the example I can think of, like from the movies when, you know, somebody is in court and, you know, the opposing side gets, you know, data dumped with discovery, and then they may miss things that might be important, and that's sometimes part of the strategy. But we don't want our borrowers to we don't want to miss things that might be important just because it's buried and it's going to take too much time to kind of dig through. And so we love to see when someone has like a summary of a project, you know, whether it's a 1-page, you know, you kind of say, hey, this is the project, this is the revenue source, these are the expected expenses, and this is the amount of equity we're going to be putting into the project, and we think we need this much debt. Those are kind of the basics. A better approach, and I've seen this more on the bioenergy side, and in fact, it is a requirement for USDA loan guarantees where you have to actually put together a full business plan that talks about, you know, feedstock availability. It talks about, you know, who's going to build the plant, what's their experience, who's going to run the plant, like what are your plans in terms of staffing, and it kind of puts together all the things that developers typically, you know, they have all this going on in their head, but it's not on paper, and it sometimes can get lost in translation when you're talking with the lender. And so, you know, if there's one thing I could leave you guys with today, that is the organization on the loan package that you submit, and kind of putting a little bit of thought into the presentation. You know, it is a little bit different than, you know, if you were pitching an equity investor on, you know, kind of investing in your company, but it is kind of similar because you are, you know, looking at, you know, raising financing. And so it is important to kind of have that, that buttoned up. And so I kind of put the business plan / you know, outline up first, because that can save both parties a lot of time. I'm talking probably weeks of back and forth calls and questions. You know, if you put that time up front into that, it'll save you a lot of time too, because if you are talking to other lenders, everybody's going to be kind of asking similar questions, and you're going to be fielding it from different sources. And so you just have a kind of a centralized package, and then you can answer questions from there. The obvious other thing would be, you know, the construction budget. There's really two things. There's a construction budget, like how much is it going to cost for me to build the plant? You know, and keeping in mind, you know, things like tariffs, or things like, you know, interest rate exchange risk. You know, how are you going to mitigate that? Are you going to enter into, you know, interest rate exchange swaps? Are you going to pre-purchase the equipment? Like how is that all going to work, and how might that impact your construction budget? And then there's the operating budget, which is really the pro forma of the project that shows the cash flows, you know, based on the PPA revenue stream, your expected expenses on running the plant, and it takes things, you know, into consideration like output and, you know, planned outages and things like that. And so, you know, just putting those two things together will save a lot. Financial statements, for some reason, this is always one that you know, it's like the last thing that I'm always asking for. It's gotten better, but, you know, it seems like there's a bit of a kind of, maybe it's an industry, you know, non-reticence to provide financial statements up front. And then sometimes it is, you know, as a developer, going to your off-taker and asking for financials can be a little tricky. And so, but we do absolutely need the financial statements for the off-taker, because that's a quick kind of, you know, check the box before you do all the work on the other stuff. That's a quick kind of check the box, like, is the bank comfortable with the off-taker and their credit? Feedstock supplier, if available, it's not always required. It just kind of depends on, you know, how sensitive the project is to the feedstock and kind of what the relationships are. And then, you know, equity sponsor, so the owner of the project, need financial statements there. And then, any other key parties like, EPC contractor, et cetera. Those are kind of quick check the box items. And then offtake and feedstock agreements. One of the big things is we'd like to, before a bank can provide terms for a deal, they'd like to know that the offtake agreement, the PPA, and the feedstock agreement are fully executed. And the reason for that is if those two things change, it changes the whole picture of the projections of the project and the potential, cash flows, and that impacts the amount that can be borrowed, et cetera. And then, of course, an off-taker or a feedstock provider could back out, and then you're kind of back to square one. And so having those fully executed is important before you start engaging with lenders. I guess one caveat to that is if you're actively negotiating and you're almost done, that would be an area where it's okay, well, we expect to execute next week, or we expect to execute relatively soon. That's kind of a requirement, but you won't get, typically won't get term sheets until it's fully executed. And the same goes for interconnection agreement, permits, environmental reports, all of the things that are notorious for delaying projects, right? And I'd say kind of on the interconnection side, it's probably the biggest culprit for project delays. Both on the upfront, getting the interconnection agreements and everything signed, and then also sometimes at the end where things come up. Maybe there's a wildfire that happened, and the utility that's interconnecting is busy and they have their resources tied up, and so they kind of put your project back in the end of the queue. And so that happens a lot. And so just kind of having that in mind and kind of planning for the worst is kind of how you make bankers happy. Plan for the worst, hope for the best. And that puts me back to the budget and making sure that you have an adequate contingency in there. Typically at least 20% is kind of what we like to see, depending on if you've fixed some of those costs, like already purchased, some of the equipment, et cetera. So that's kind of a good rule of thumb, about 20% for these kind of large capital intensive projects. And that way you're setting yourself up for success and making sure that you can get the project built without too much hiccup and delay. Because there will be delays for sure. I've yet to finance a project that was not delayed, and so it's kind of an unfortunate reality in project finance. But one day I'd like to finance a project that is on time. We'll see. All right. What questions do you have on the bank package?
When you said 20%, did you mean 20% of the budget kind of as contingency to cover those delays? Is that what you meant?
Yeah, that's and in projects that we financed with less contingency at the end of the financing, it ended up being about 20% typically. And so that's kind of where that's coming from. Yeah. Any other questions? Great. Okay. Couple of other credit considerations and deal structure. I mentioned this earlier where, if there's a mismatch in the feedstock agreement or other kind of components of the project that are, considered to be riskier, there are, different things that, we can consider as what we call credit enhancements, which is basically outside support outside of just the cash flows of the project. And that includes personal or corporate guarantees. And depending on the balance sheet of those individuals or corporations, that can definitely provide more favorable terms and interest rates. USDA or other government guarantee programs are a great tool. They do add some time to the closing timeline, especially on the, with the USDA. So just making sure that, you're planning for that up top and kind of communicating, timelines, et cetera, with your lender, I think is good. There can also be some co-lending arrangements. I put in here co-lending arrangements with iBank. I've done some work with them, and unfortunately there was a bit of a freeze on a very I think good program that came out this year, and that's related to some of the freezes that are happening at the federal level. And so I'm hopeful that that there might be an opportunity to do some of those co-lending arrangements again, but my understanding is that that may be a bit on pause right now, but we're monitoring it closely, and there might be some new arrangement or new developments that I'm not aware of yet, so don't take my word for it. And then again, I like to highlight the fact that grants are an excellent source of equity capital for a project, and there's a lot of grants that are at the state level that are still, including CAL FIRE, that are still available and great sources of capital for a project. And then lastly, here's a fun photo of me and the folks at Hat Creek bioenergy project that we financed. And I share it here to kind of, I love watching kind of the progression from the groundbreaking, and then soon we'll have the commissioning. So it comes full circle, and you get to kind of see a project go from just dirt in the ground to something that's actually being productive. So I'll end with that and put my contact information up so you guys can grab that, and I will open up for questions.
I can go. Rosa, thank you again. I had been looking into the iBank stuff, and I know it's on pause. Would you spend just another moment talking about your experience working with them and what they bring to the table in terms of, loan benefits or collateral or credit enhancement? Are there upper limits to how much? I believe it's like an underwriting sort of, or a backing, like a loan backing sort of program. So
Yeah.
how does that work, and what are the limits of that?
Sure. Yeah. So both the USDA loan guarantee program and programs like ones that the iBank might offer are what we call loss share guarantees in the banking world, meaning that whatever the percent is, typically 80%. It can be lower, it can be higher, but typically it's 80%. Loan guarantee is a loss share with the lender. So if the worst case happens and the project or the project is unviable and the bank has to go and liquidate, once they've gone through the liquidation process, the agency providing the guarantee, whether it's USDA or iBank, would share the loss with the lender 80-20. So basically it's a long way of saying it reduces the overall exposure that a lender would have, you're reducing an exposure to basically 20% loss. And so that's where those programs really open up a lot of opportunities, because lenders are perhaps more willing to do a deal if their overall exposure is lower. My rule of thumb is always, in our philosophy at River City Bank, is we never do a deal and just slap a guarantee on it and hope for the best. That is not the way to run a bank. It's not the way to utilize those programs. Those programs they're very well thought out, and I use them for things like, for example, I guess the best example I can provide you that's relative to this discussion is the conversation we had about the feedstock and the length of the term, and it having a USDA guarantee or iBank guarantee just makes the bank more comfortable, because there is this kind of risk out there that the feedstock price could skyrocket. And there is a risk out there that, the feedstock, might go away. And so it just depends on the source of the feedstock and kind of the surrounding areas as well. But that is kind of a mitigating factor, having that. More specifically to your question, John, with iBank, we've done some deals through their Climate Tech Guarantee Program, which is capped at $5 million guarantee. And so, that would be, roughly, or let's call it, we'll round down, roughly a $6 million loan amount, $5 million guarantee. And they have typically been for, businesses in the climate tech space, but I know that, they've also looked at some projects as well. And so that's the program I have most experience with. iBank also has other programs and guarantee programs that, could be leveraged, but they're typically all capped at $5 million. The other program that we were both talking about that got kind of frozen because the funding for that program came from a federal agency, and so that's frozen right now. That would have opened up guarantees up to about 25 million, and so it's a considerable difference. And then, of course, there are some other differences and qualifications that had to be met in order to use those funds. And I won't get into those details here, but that's kind of the facts at present. Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you again.
Rosa, I'm curious how much you consider scaling. For instance, if you give a loan to a business that is very successful, does really well, but they're replicable in multiple other areas. Does that make it easier for them to ask you for additional loans to let's say duplicate what they're doing in multiple other spots, especially if it's like a bioenergy business that was dependent on forest products or forest offtake?
Yeah, I think I understand your question. So you're asking, is it more probable that you can get a traditional loan with a lender, if you've already proven that you've got a successful business operation and you're trying to just scale that up?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything is, you'd have to look at, the industry and the specific use case, but I'd say a general statement, yes. It is always difficult to come to a bank and say, hey, these are projections of what I think I will be able to do. Because it's hard to underwrite to projections when there hasn't been, a history of success. So yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? You guys are very inquisitive. This is great.
Well, I did have a question in terms of forest or wood related activities. Does River City Bank fund, maybe more forest product activities and especially newer activities? Like, for example, Jeff Grief, he's got a new product that he's developing that's, I don't think it has a super long track record in the West. I guess in the Netherlands and North Carolina, I think there's anyway, I guess the broader question is, do you all fund forest product related businesses, and if you don't, who else might do that?
Yeah, I haven't myself, but definitely an area of interest, and I'd welcome maybe a private conversation on kind of what the business opportunity is. And we've got, outside of what we do on the clean energy side, and kind of what we're talking about here is very niche in project finance and bioenergy. We are a traditional commercial bank, and so we can, at the end of the day, credit is credit, and we're trained to look at risks and opportunities. And so I think our credit philosophy and experience can be applied to many different industries for sure.
Great, cool. Yeah.
Great.
All right. Anyone else? Questions for Rosa? Thank you so much, Rosa.
Yeah, this has been great. Let me stop sharing here. And again, feel free, Jim, you can share the slide deck with the attendees here and your broader network if you'd like. You have my contact information, so if you guys have questions, feel free to reach out, and I hope to come across some of you at industry events or at some future Forest Business Alliance events as well.
Thanks, Rosa.
Thank you, Russ. The slides
Fantastic.
and the info was super clear and really interesting. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm
Very helpful.
happy you guys enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it.
I know.
All right, y'all. Anyone else have any final words?
Enjoy the spring.
Great to see everyone. I hope to see you at the Sawmill Workshop in May.
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
All right.
Take
Take
care.
care, all.
Have a good one.
Bye now.
John,
everybody.
you would still have a couple minutes to stay on?
Yeah.
Jim, I'm gonna talk to John for a couple of seconds. So, do you want to give me back the control?
Yeah. Let's see. I'll turn off the recording.